Okay, so welcome back. So in order to do this video, you should have some bead soup with you that you've poured out into a plate so that you can kind of see your beads. And the beads that you were using for this are going to be the round size 11s that are in there. Don't be using a whole lot of funky other beads. You should have already seen the bead sizing video, the beading needles video. You should have already done the threading the needle video, and you should have your practice piece labeled practice, and your button should be sewn on. So those were all the previous knowledge that you need in order to do this. So sorry, I am using black thread rather than using white thread just to make it show up, but I mean obviously you are going to be using white thread that you were provided. So you're going to choose your needle. For this, I would like you to use a size 13 or a size 16 needle because we're going to be passing through the bead many times. If you use a size 11, it can get frustrating and you might not get through. So I'm going to use a 16 just because I like using size 16s. And I find them easier to thread oddly than I do the size 13. So if you don't know how to thread the needle, there's a video on threading needles on the channel. And I'm going to bring my magnifier in again because, as I've said before, my near sight is starting to fail on me because I'm like 47 and your eyes, the muscles around your eyes kind of degenerate as you get older. It's just part of aging. So thread your needle, get it all ready, you've got your buttons, you're good to go. So this stitch is not a traditional stitch. This is called a backstitch or a bezel stitch sometimes. I find it's the easiest for beginners to start, just so that you get used to handling a needle, handling beads. Like, it's just going to get you kind of feeling a little more confident, and the advantage to it is that it hides thread really well, and that most students that try this stitch, if you only learned one stitch, you could make some pretty cool stuff just with this one stitch. This knot is not cooperating with me at all. Oh, there we go. Alright, and I'll trim that tail a little. So remember in the button video I showed you guys that you need to kind of like anchor when you're using it. When you're putting beads on embroidery fabric, you need to like really anchor your thread. And remember, we're focusing on learning to manipulate fabric with our non-beading hand. And so you want to try and learn to be consistent and feel where that needle is coming up. That's kind of like the whole point of you doing the first project, like this practice thing. So I want to poke up my needle, not under the button, but right next to the button. So see if I can. So you want to come up like right next to the button, not under it. That's not going to be helpful. And you're going to poke up, and at first you're going to poke up all over the place. Oh no, it's not the end of the world. Calm down. Take a breath. Okay, so now I am poked up right next to that button. So I will pull up, except I forgot it's embroidery fabric, and sometimes it will just pull right through. Sometimes it won't. Just check. Just in case, you can double stitch this down, so you can actually just stitch down. And sometimes with embroidery fabric, or with the thread, especially when it's not waxed, when you're pulling threads through, they can get staticky, and they can get caught on things. So I like to loop the thread over my finger, or insert my finger in this loop, so that way when I'm pulling this thread through, it doesn't get as snarled up on me. It still gets a little snarled, and you just give it a little tug so that these two threads are even. So the threads are going to come down, and I would say that I'm a little far out there, but I don't really care because it's just a practice thing, so it's fine. You better to be a little too far out for this stitch than to be underneath it. So I'm going to come up. Whoops, I'm stuck on my... Oh So things like this will happen, especially when you're working on a really crowded surface. But, so here I am. I have poked up from underneath. Now I need to pick up beads. In order to do this stitch, when you go to your bead soup, you are going to be picking out like 2 beads, same color. So just 2 beads that look kind of the same color so that you can kind of see how this works. So I'm going to pick up this blue one and another blue one. When you pick up a bead, you kind of like, you insert the bead into, very lightly insert the bead into the, you see that? Yeah. So I'll do it again. So you go along and you kind of very lightly go on the top and it kind of goes on. And then you snick it on and you hold it with a little bit of tension. That's why all my needles get bent, right? Because if you use too much tension. And it's okay if you bend your needle. Like, get another needle or just use a bent one on the end of the world. So you need 2, and I'm going to use the same blue. So you're going to have 2 beads on your needle. So with my 2 beads on my needle, here is the basic stitch. I'm going to let them fall down on my thread, and I'm going to bring them all the way to the base of what I'm sewing. So you can see that these needles, keep calling them needles, but these beads, there's 2 of them, and here we are. So there's 2 beads there, and you're going to be sewing around, you're going to be beading around the button as though it were a cabochon. So here we go. So what I find most useful is sometimes I'll fold up the fabric like this so I can reach and do the pinch that I showed you earlier. And you've got this beads, and I angle the thread up so that I kind of like angle the thread up like this so that the beads sit where I want them to do. If I wanted to go that way, I would angle the thread that way and the beads would go in that direction. But I don't want that. I want the beads to go like over this way. So by kind of like holding the bead, I'm kind of holding it down with this finger, and I'm going to tap the beads into place. So I'm going to use my needle. So if the beads were all like all over the place, right over here, you don't want them there. You want them like right on the fabric. So by lightly tapping them, you can tap them into place. Now that's going to be secure, and this is exactly the point where you want to stab the needle down. So I'll show you that again. So say the beads were all over here. You're going to tap your beads down till they're at their point of origin where the thread comes up. And then you're going to stab down right next to the bead, but not like through the bead. You're going to stab down and you're going to pull your thread all the way through. And when you first start doing this stitch, it will be like a little wobbly. Don't sweat that. It will firm up later. So now I'm going to come back up. I'm going to try and stab back up next to where I started, like right at the beginning of those 2 beads. So I've got these 2 blue beads here, and I'm going to try and stab up right here. So I'm going to come up, and when you first do this, it'll be all over the place, but you'll get better at like placing your needle and figuring out like where your needle's at, right? Based on like your fingers underneath. So I'm going to pull. Now you notice I am right next to those beads, but I am not like on those beads. I'm right behind where I first started. Now here's the trick. This is why it's a backstitch. You're going to go through the beads, not the fabric. So I'll show you that again. So this time, so you've come back up from behind, and you're going to be going through the beads, but not the fabric. And you kind of have to feel your way. And then you're going to pull through. Now once you've pulled through, give it a little tug. That'll give it tension. Now that was like the start of a backstitch. And from here on out, you like add, it's called 2 steps forward, 3 steps back. So every time you're going to be adding 2 beads. So I'm going to add 2 beads, and I'm going to use a different color just so you can kind of see the difference. You don't always have to alternate the colors, that's just fine. But excuse me. So I guess we'll use orange this time. So, and it doesn't matter that they're the same orange or not, I just want to show you the difference. So 2 oranges, here we go. So again, you're picking up 2 needles from your bead soup. You're bringing it down and you're gonna like kind of brace it by doing this, and you're gonna tap it down. Now if I kept going straight like this, I wouldn't be curving the way I need to curve. So the way to curve is to just gently move your fabric over a little bit, right? So if I wanted to go that direction, I would go that way, but I don't. I want to go this direction, so I'm gonna like curve along the button, and I'm gonna tap it, and I'm gonna stab down the same way I did. So sorry, I'll show you that in a better angle. So tap, 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 stab down, pull through, and it can get a little confusing when you're first doing this, but just be patient. And remember, if you get a snarl, it's not a big deal to just pull it all out, right? So now I just don't want those beads to go underneath. See, there's a gap here. That's okay. That's just fine. In a later lesson, I'll show you a different stitch that will help you hold that button in place. So now you went 2 steps forward. The oranges are the 2 steps forward. Now this is the 3 steps back part. And I'm going to try to like really angle in here, if you can see this. Yeah, alright. So there we go. Right up there. Sorry. Okay, so now when you're coming up, you want to come back up 3 beads back. So you exited here. Sorry, you exited here, right? So you want to come back up 1, 2, 3 back. You want to come back up in between those first 2 beads. So when you poke back up, it's tricky, but you'll get used to it. And you're going to poke back up right in between those 2 beads. See if you can focus a little more. I'm not sure. We'll try. Yeah, so here's my needle. That's not far back enough. I'm only 2 beads back. It's 3 beads back that you need. So you need to poke it back up in the middle of those 2 beads. It's tricky, but that's close enough to being in the middle of the 2 beads. If you could see that, it's like 3 back. So I'm going to pull up through, and in fact I end up kind of like on the side, but it's not the end of the world. Alright, so now I go through those 3 beads. So I have to maneuver it, and I go through these 3 beads here, and then I pull it. And now I'm just going to add 2 more beads. So I'll pick up another 2 beads. Let's go with like a dark blue this time. Maybe it will show up better. So I've got like my 2 dark blue beads. I'm going to go back to where I was, and I'm going to start going around the edges. See, I'm going around the edges of this button, and it will curve around. So that's kind of like what you want to do. You just do the exact same process where you tap it in place the same way I showed you. Tap, 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 and then stab down where you want it to be. Pull through, and sometimes you get a little loop like that. It's because you're not pulling both sides of the thread evenly, like this little loop here. So you might have to go back here and just tug on each thread individually to like get the loop, get rid of that loop, which I did. Ta-da! So it's starting to look like beadwork. So you went how many steps forward? 2. So you have to go 3 steps back, right? So I'm going to come back up in the middle of which color? Orange, right? Because it's going to be 1, 2, 3. So I'm going to come back up, and I'm going to get through there in between the 2 oranges. There I am, right there. I hope you can see that. Yeah, so back up in between those 2 oranges. I'm 3 beads back, pull through, and then I'm going to stab through those 3 beads. I shouldn't say stab, it just sounds so violent, but you got to kind of pry it up sometimes and get the needle through those 3. So in order to advance, you actually have to go through the 3. Now, this stitch is super strong because effectively you end up going through each bead individually, like you're basically sewing down every single bead. And it doesn't look that great now because it's using black, so you can see like all my thread, but it does hide thread like in a better way. So now for your practice, when you first do this, it'll be kind of wobbly, but what you're going to do is you're just going to keep taking like 2 beads, and so add 2, go back 3, and just do it until you could do it in your sleep. The thing is, you get better at things by like practicing actually doing them, right? So it's the kind of thing that you have to actually practice. So I added 2 beads. I got to go back 3, which means coming up in between those 2 blues, right? Now when you come back up, you go through 3, because I added those pink ones there. So I'm going through the 3. Now what am I supposed to do? Well, unsnarl the edge of this, give it a tug so it tightens, and add 2 more beads. And so you're just going to keep doing this until you're all the way around. And that's going to be the next lesson. So this is it. If all you did was learn this one stitch, you can make a bunch of different stuff. So like all the stuff on the, when you look at the stuff that a lot of other students have done in the classroom and all the examples and stuff, like, or something like this, which was not done by me. This is a guy called Justin's Quills that I bought it off Instagram, and he uses birch bark. It's really cool, right? It's so sparkly. You got the rhinestones. You could make this using the stitch that you just learned. It would be tedious because the stitch I just showed you is a really, really labor-intensive stitch. But if this is all you learn, you can bead some cool stuff. That's it. That's the single needle back stitch. So do all the way around this and then come back for the next lesson, which will be a little bit more about getting into actually your actual project. But keep this because this is going to be your practice thing.